Vintage Story might be the best example of a horror game done right, and it's not even a horror game. It's a survival sandbox game where you can make cute little houses, farm like there's no tomorrow, and even make some awesome tools with the metals you find. And that's exactly why it's terrifying. The game organically makes players dread and fear it in a way that I've never seen a game do before. That makes it go from yet another kid-friendly survival game to something that only the strong-hearted would dare to try. I am not a fan of horror games. I do not like them. I don't really enjoy getting scared shitless just for the sake of getting scared shitless. And I think in order for a horror game to be good to me, it has to have some kind of hook other than just being scary. Five Nights at Freddy's, I'm sorry, is a good example of a game that is uniquely horrifying. So horrifying that it spawned an entire subgenre of horror games, and humanity has lost a lot of brain cells collectively since then. I do not care for FNAF as a franchise. The first few games are pretty cool, but after that I really just don't care and I don't keep up with them. I sometimes watch Markiplier play them because I'm nostalgic for it, not gonna lie, for the good old days of FNAF, but I don't know anything about them nowadays. However, I will die defending the first FNAF game. It is an excellently crafted game with some of the scariest horror elements I've ever seen. I dread playing this game. It's an actually scary experience. But FNAF is trying to be scary. It's a horror game through and through. Creepy mascots playing on people's masculophobia and the uncanny valley with excellent sound design, legit good jump scares. It knows what it's doing and it does a good job. I think many horror games fall into the walk around while holding a flashlight and do some puzzles while avoiding the scary monster trope, and they almost always seem to try that too hard and it doesn't work for me. So many mechanics are done to death and themes get reused constantly. After all, there is only so much that can be considered scary. I'm not saying all horror games are bland or generic ripoffs of each other, of course not, but the reason why a game like FNAF works so well is because it subverts genre expectations. I can't think of a single horror game before FNAF where the primary gameplay was done while sitting still, unable to run or hide. Even FNAF fan games fall into that trope of running from some monster. It just doesn't work for me. That's why a game that isn't trying to be a horror game can suddenly be so horrifying. It's not trying to scare you, not explicitly, nor is the main point of the game fear. Vintage Story is not a horror game. Despite what I just said a moment ago, it's not actually a horror game. It's a game designed with many playstyles in mind and tons of ways to customize your experience. However, most forms of play will see you interacting with many of the scarier elements that I'm about to describe. You can make the game a lot less scary though with customization, but I'd argue there is something lost in doing so. Sure, the devs want you to play the game however you want, that's the point of a sandbox game, but I think there is value in playing the game how they want you to play it. That's why there are predefined game modes. It makes it easier for players to do what they want without much hassle. If I don't want to deal with the spooky creatures, I can play the Homo sapien mode where I'm the first person to ever exist on the planet and it's just pure survival and creativity. For the purposes of this video, let's assume that most players play Vintage Story in a manner similar to what the developers would call normal survival mode. That is to say that they play the game in the way that the devs intended. The lore, the dungeons, NPCs, all the monsters all exist, but maybe there's a few minor tweaks here and there when it comes to things like hunger rate or how often oceans occur, something similar to the mode that the game ships with. The first few days of any given playthrough are typically spent trying to get a lay of the land, as well as getting firewood, perhaps some food, basic tools, or maybe even forming some pottery as the night comes. Players spend a lot of time doing rather mundane tasks. Things like picking up sticks and rocks at the forest floor, cutting down cattails to make some baskets to hold more items, gathering plants for food, or even hunting down small wildlife to get a nice tasty meal, are all things that you will be doing. The music, the world, the atmosphere is all pretty inviting. Vintage Story has a unique music style, and I think it plays really well into the unique world. The first night usually isn't all that special. Players may spend some time making a simple shelter to sleep on their new hay bed, or maybe they'll just stay up making pottery as the night progresses. No matter what, the first night is generally pretty peaceful. As we get more settled into our world, some things become apparent. Some of the first progression that we feel is when we get our hands on copper. With 40 copper bits and some clay molds, we can make a pickaxe and a hammer to start mining more copper. With our first metal tools, we can make things like wooden planks, stronger weapons to hunt and to stave off monsters if we need to, or even making some metal armor. The best part about getting copper is that it usually can be easily done on the surface. We can find copper bits in the ground, and there is bound to be some copper ore just below it. This means we can get our hands on our first tools without ever needing to go underground, and that's a very important feature. Sure, there are these creepy looking monsters and they pack a hell of a punch, but I think you can see that as long as you hang out on the surface, you rarely have to deal with these things, and if you do run into one, you can pretty easily take it out with a copper falx. It's a weapon made specifically for killing the monsters. It's cool, it's whatever, it's a neat shaped weapon. So the guys on the surface are a little more than the rare nuisance that you have to deal with every once in a while, but they are creepy. They are intentionally unsettling and will do unsettling things. The shivers, for example, will sometimes curl up and convulse like a dying spider, or even bang their head on the ground, or worse, just stand up and stare at the skies. It's absolutely terrifying. The locusts are obviously horrifying because they're like spiders, but the boatworn are simply the worst thing in the game. Their ranged attack is a bitch. If we ignore the parts of the game that are intentionally scary, like monster design, we can still find plenty of horrifying elements. For starters, running around in the woods. In any other survival sandbox game, hanging out in the woods is a beautiful, peaceful experience. We can cut trees, enjoy the wildlife, and make whatever it is we desire. In Vintage Story, hanging out in the woods takes away one of our most important resources: sight. The dense flora and trees block our ability to see predators. However, the predators can see us just fine. When I need to travel long distances, I will sometimes avoid forests simply because I fear that a wolf or a bear might jump out at me. Hell, this can happen at any time. Wolves and bears tend to live near forests, but sometimes they'll just be running around some hills and pop around a corner and suddenly you're shitting your pants because there's a bear nearby. What I love is that it's incredibly hard to outrun wildlife, especially if you're wearing armor. Armor has weight to it and it slows you down. An encounter with any wild animal larger than a fox could mean serious injury or death. Even the more docile animals can attack the player. When attacked, a fox will sometimes fight back. Goats and boars will of course fight back, and sometimes they're territorial, and even wild moose or elk will charge the player if they get too close. It's a very realistic kind of fear. The fear of losing your belongings is certainly a good way to deter people from carelessly attacking wildlife, but the world itself can bring out a sense of dread. Dread is an important element to horror. Dreading the unknown or what is coming builds tension. The very knowledge that something bad could happen or will happen is enough to raise blood pressure, especially when it's something you know you will have to face. Winter is probably the best example of this. No matter what you do, you cannot avoid winter, unless you turn off the true winter feature, but let's assume you're not doing that. When the snow comes, you don't just lose your ability to grow crops or need warmer clothing, but you also need to keep stockpiles of food for yourself and any livestock that you have. From the very start of a playthrough, it's incredibly important to grow some kind of grain for smaller animals like chickens. It's important to grow crops for yourself, make storage vessels, and put crops in a cellar to keep them fresh for long periods of time. Not only that, but the wildlife loses weight in the winter. With no grains to eat, the animals will use the fat of their bodies to survive. This means that when you kill an animal, it's very likely that they'll drop less meat or smaller pelts and contain less fat. Animal fat is an incredibly useful resource. It's used to cure leather, to seal crocs for long-term food storage, and even make oil lamps that never go out, whereas torches go out after 2 days. Having access to these things is incredibly important. Without it, survival is kind of a bitch. Even the act of leaving your house without proper clothing can spell bad news for you. Your body can only handle temperatures above freezing, so if you walk out while it's minus 5 degrees Celsius, you're going to be cold as fuck. You'll lose your vision, you'll start losing health, run slower, and even freeze to death if you stay out too long. That is a long-term form of dread that looms over the back of the player's mind during their first year. Will I be able to get enough to get through the winter is a question I asked a lot in my first couple of playthroughs. However, as we get used to the world, this fear kind of subsides. Winter is just a part of life, and honestly it doesn't really last that too long, so there isn't really much to worry about once you know what you're doing. But it is nigh impossible to ignore the caves. If you want to progress beyond copper, heading below is the only way to do so. And this is where the caves come in. As soon as you get into a cave, the game's atmosphere shifts dramatically. The bright music and landscapes are taken over by dark ambient tracks and the tight corridors of cave systems, and even with a torch, you're not seeing much. A torch is only going to light up a few blocks in front of you, and beyond that, the darkness develops any sort of foe, camouflaging them from your ability to see. Because of your lack of sight, your hearing becomes a wonderful asset, and the Vintage Story dev team uses that asset against you. You are rarely ever alone in caves, and unlike their brethren on the surface, the monsters in the caves can handle more than just a few hits. As we go deeper, the stronger the monsters get, but at no matter what level, all the monsters make the same horrifying sounds. If you can hear a monster, there's a good chance they know where you are, but what exactly dwells in these caves? Well, there's the drifters, the shivers, and bowtorn that I already spoke about, and the locusts are always horrifying, but there is one more enemy that hides in these stone tunnels. The bell. Imagine you're mining for some minerals. You fend off a drifter here and there, and you find some materials for you to take home. As you search more, you hear the ringing of a bell, and suddenly you are swarmed by enemies. Locusts, shivers, drifters, bowtorn are all coming for you. They know exactly where you are because you got too close to a bell. I don't know if it's physically possible to feel your own blood pressure rise, but each time I hear a bell, my adrenaline kicks in instantly. The ring of a bell is enough to make me quit. It's enough to make me run away. Even if the ore in front of me is exactly what I need, I'm not sticking around. And this is where Vintage Story combines all of its features to create the perfect horror game scenario. This video cannot do this experience justice. By the time you get into caves, you've spent dozens of hours on the surface, maybe jumping into a cave once or twice for a moment or two. Once you realize the danger, the very prospect of going into a cave to try to find that one ore you need to make the fucking bismuth bronze becomes not just something you fear, but something you dread. And I think it's incredibly clever game design to have part of the main progression be so terrifying. The game does a really good job of making you feel like you're making good progress up to the point of copper tools, and it's only after that you realize that if you want something better, you're gonna have to go down to get it, and then the fear sets in. Having a shiver jump out at you in the darkness is no joke. It's one of the most single horrifying things in a video game. Being chased down by multiple enemies while you desperately hold on to all your valuables is one of the most invigorating experiences, honestly. It gets really gets the blood pumping, you know, and because of that experience, getting out alive is all the more satisfying. It's not that you just managed to squeeze out of a cave and get back to safety, it's also that you're on a time limit. You see, one of Vintage Story's core features is called temporal stability. Think of it as like a sanity meter, something like, I don't know, Phasmophobia did. Not at all related, but think of it similar to that if you've ever played that game. Basically, the more insane you get, or the more temporally unstable you get, the more bad shit starts to happen. Monsters spawn more and in stronger varieties, and if your temporal stability gets down low enough, you'll trigger what's called a temporal storm. During a temporal storm, monsters will fade in and out of reality as land around you bends and glitches. Any kind of monster will spawn into any strength. Being in a cave during a temporal storm is one of the worst possible places you could find yourself. Even if you dig yourself into a tiny hole and wait for the storm to pass, guess what? Those monsters aren't likely to despawn, and while you've been sitting still, you've been giving more time for other monsters to spawn. So, pro tip, if you're ever caught in a cave during a temporal storm like I was during this stream, consider getting the fuck out while you can or risk losing it all. Oh no. Oh no. I fucked up! Ladies and gentlemen, I have actually fucked up. Fuck it, fuck it, fuck it, fuck it, fuck it, fuck it. We're going, fuck it. I'm gonna die outside like a real man. I am not dying in this fucking hole. Dave! Dave! We gotta have a talk, man. You show up at the worst fucking times. I love you. But we gotta have a talk about this, okay? A little warning next time. You didn't even say like, oh, imminent. No, you just show up. Better yet, just don't go mining. The game warns you when one is coming. Heed such warnings. All of these elements work together to create a wonderful experience, and once you're on the surface again, you're back to doing the mundane shit of like smithing, farming, taking care of livestock, and living a semi-normal life knowing that danger lies just below you. And that's not even getting into the dungeons of Vintage Story. Vintage Story has like 2 or 3 dungeons, depending on who you ask, that are all just horrible. They're just like the worst thing imaginable. The first one, the Renaissance Archives, starts with a massive hole that just goes down. You can drop a torch and watch it go for way longer than is comfortable. And once you're inside, things don't get better. There is a massive central chamber with several corridors off to the sides and something making a lot of fucking noise. I have never felt fear like this when I walked into this place and put on night vision goggles. It terrified me. What is this thing, and why does it exist? Why does it make such awful sounds? Then there's the Lazaret, which I would call more of a mini dungeon. Here we not only find some more monsters, yay, but we can also see that somebody has been living down here for a long time. There are etchings on the walls of tiny marks and other strange symbols, not to mention the trash and rotted things all over the ground. Whoever was here is either dead or long gone, and we actually get to meet who that was, but that's a story for a different day. Then there's the Devastation, which I will not show footage of because I want to keep some surprises for players who haven't played the game. But imagine walking into hell, but everything is made of metal instead of like fire. That's the Devastation. And that's why Vintage Story is pretty much a horror game without really being a horror game. I've never played a game that instilled so much fear and dread into me, and this game is wonderful because of that. Imagine playing like Doki Doki Literature Club. I know, totally whack fucked off reference there, but imagine playing that game without reading the little warning at the start of the game or any of the Steam genre tags. It would just hit you out of nowhere but fuck you up. But this is kind of like that, except drawn out in a completely different genre. The game sets you up and builds this fear and dread inside, making overcoming that fear and dread all the more satisfying. If you like Minecraft, but you actually want to feel alive again when playing it, consider playing Vintage Story. If you like this video, consider hitting the like button. Subscribe if you want more Vintage Story content. I also make Zelda content every once in a while, so that's pretty cool. I make videos on games that I like. And if you want to see somebody passionately talk about things that they enjoy, consider sticking around or getting a membership. It starts at $3 a month. It would mean a lot to me. Also, thanks to these members on screen, one of which is the creator of Vintage Story, which is pretty cool. Thanks, Tyrone.